There comes a time in every man's life when the ground beneath him gives way. When everything you've built, everything you believed in, just slips out from under you like it was never really there to begin with. For me, that moment didn't come with flashing lights or some dramatic showdown. It hit me in the low-lit corner of a bar I'd never been to before, surrounded by strangers who had no clue they were watching my world fall apart right in front of them. It didn't start with suspicion, or even jealousy. Just this faint, uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. One of those thoughts you try to shove away because if you face it, if you really look it in the eye, you're forced to admit something's wrong. And for months, I didn't want to believe that. I'd built my whole life on the belief that my wife, Amanda, was everything I thought she was. My best friend, my partner, the woman I swore to love through everything. I honestly believed she was just as committed to me as I was to her. But that night, I couldn't silence that whisper. I hadn't planned to leave the house. I was half asleep on the couch, the TV buzzing with some late-night show I wasn't even paying attention to. Amanda leaned down, kissed me on the forehead, and smiled in that effortless way she always did. Told me she was going out for a drink with a few co-workers. Nothing crazy, she said. I'll be home soon. Only, she wasn't. And before I knew it, my hands were locked so tight on the steering wheel my knuckles ached. I was parked outside a bar I'd never even heard of, heart thudding in my chest like it was trying to break free. I don't remember the decision to follow her. It wasn't something I thought through. My body just moved. Like something deep inside me, deeper than logic, had taken over. I sat there for what felt like forever, staring up at the neon sign buzzing above the entrance. My mind kept repeating the same thing. This is crazy. Go home. You're just being paranoid. But I didn't turn the car around. That quiet voice in my head wouldn't shut up, and I knew if I didn't walk through those doors, I'd never stop wondering. So I got out of the car, walked inside, and stepped right into the worst moment of my life. The first thing that hit me was the music. Not loud, not thumping, just a slow, lazy beat that settled into the background. The second thing was her. She was sitting in a booth tucked away near the back. Not in the middle of the bar like someone just grabbing a drink after work. No, she was hiding. That much was clear. And she wasn't alone. There was a man sitting across from her. Some guy I'd never seen before. And they were sitting close, closer than two people should if all they're doing is grabbing a post-work beer. At first, I tried to talk myself down. Maybe it was innocent. A coworker she trusted. Someone she felt comfortable around. Nothing more. But then I saw it. Her hand. It was resting gently on his wrist. Barely touching, but enough to send a jolt through my chest like I just walked into oncoming traffic. Something so small, something that might not even register to anyone else, completely shattered me. I stopped walking. Just froze there, feet planted like I'd turned to stone. My lungs stopped working. My heart, though, it kept pounding harder and harder until I could feel it in my fingertips. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave. Walk away. Get out before it got worse. But I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot. And then, she leaned in. It wasn't drunk. It wasn't rushed. It was slow. Intentional. Like she was savoring the moment. Her eyes scanned his face, and then she kissed him. Not a peck. Not an accident. A kiss full of history. Like it wasn't the first time. Like it had happened before, and it would happen again. I'd imagined worst-case scenarios before. Who hasn't? But nothing prepares you for the moment the woman you love shows you, in the most deliberate way, that you don't mean a damn thing anymore. And even then, I didn't look away. I walked toward them. The moment she saw me, it was like someone hit pause on her whole body. Her hand dropped from his wrist like it had been caught in a trap. But it was too late. I had seen everything. "Hey," I said. My voice was calm. Too calm. She blinked like she was trying to wake up from a dream. Her face turned pale, lips parted like she wanted to speak, but the words got stuck. The guy looked at me too, trying to figure out what the hell he'd just walked into. His eyes flicked from her to me like he knew he'd just stepped into something he shouldn't have. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my wedding ring. It felt heavy in my hand, like it suddenly weighed more than it ever had before. I didn't say anything. Just placed it on the table between them. Her mouth opened. Jason, wait. I can explain. But I was already gone. Walked out into the cold night air, my chest hollow and my mind spinning like I'd just been hit by a truck. I came here looking for clarity. I found it. I just had no idea what to do with it now. The second I stepped outside that bar, the cold air hit me like a slap. I didn't even feel my body move. 1 minute I was staring at Amanda with that guy, and the next I was back behind the wheel of my car, gripping it so tight my hands felt like they might snap. I couldn't make sense of what I had just seen. I mean, yeah, I had played out what-ifs in my head before. We all do, right? You catch a weird vibe, you imagine the worst. But imagining something and watching it happen right in front of your eyes, that's a whole different kind of pain. And the worst part? My brain kept trying to lie to me. To soften the blow. Maybe it didn't mean anything. Maybe she got caught up in the moment. Maybe she didn't even realize what she was doing. But those were all just stories I was telling myself to survive the truth. Because there was no mistaking what I saw. No confusion. No misinterpretation. She kissed him like she knew exactly what she was doing. And I stood there like a damn fool and watched it happen. The street outside was quiet. Too quiet. It was like the world just kept going, business as usual, while mine had just been ripped apart. Cars passed by. A couple walked out of the bar, laughing, completely unaware they'd just stepped through the scene of a crime. My crime scene. I looked down at my hand. The spot where my ring used to sit was bare now, but it still felt like something was there. A phantom weight. A reminder of what I'd left behind. The ring was still sitting on that table. Between Amanda and that man. That wasn't something I could just walk back from. That wasn't some dramatic gesture I'd regret tomorrow. It was a line drawn in stone. I didn't know what came next. I just knew nothing would ever be the same again. That's when I heard it. A knock on my window. Sharp. Urgent. I flinched, heart crashing against my ribs like a warning bell. And when I turned, there she was. Amanda. Her face was pale, eyes wide with panic and guilt. And something else, too, something like fear. Maybe not of me, but of what she'd just done. I stared at her through the glass for a second, my hand hovering over the ignition. I could have driven off right then and there. I should have. But instead, I cracked the window. Jason, please. Her voice was barely there. We need to talk. I took a breath, slow and controlled. I didn't want to lose it. I didn't want to yell or break down. I just wanted to stay numb. I think we already did, I said flat. She swallowed hard. No, you don't understand. It's not what it looked like. I actually laughed. One of those dry, humorless laughs you don't even mean to let out. Really? Because from where I was standing, it looked pretty damn clear. Her lip trembled. But I didn't flinch. Not anymore. I was past the point of sympathy. Just give me a chance to explain, she said, her hands gripping the window like she could somehow hold me in place. Explain what? That it was a mistake? That she didn't mean to get caught? That she still loved me? I could already feel all the excuses she might throw at me piling on my shoulders like wet concrete. I shook my head, tightening my grip on the wheel. You had your chance. Before you kissed him. She winced like I'd hit her. Her mind was scrambling for something, anything, to make it all okay again. Jason, she whispered. Her voice had lost all its edge now, like she finally realized just how far this had gone. Can we just go home? Go home. Those two words made my stomach turn. That house. That life we built together. It suddenly felt like enemy territory. Every wall, every photo, every corner of that place would be soaked in this betrayal. I didn't even realize how hard I was clenching my jaw until I saw her eyes flicker down at my hands. She saw something shift in me. Her face broke, just slightly. Then what do you want me to do? She asked, almost helpless. That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? What did I want? I wanted to rewind the clock. I wanted this to be a dream. I wanted her to be someone else, someone incapable of doing this. But none of that was real. All I knew was, I needed space. "I don't know," I said, softer this time. "But I know I can't stay here." Her eyes welled up, and I could feel her trying not to cry. But I didn't care. Not anymore. "Don't follow me," I added. And then I rolled up the window. She didn't move. Just stood there, staring at me through the glass like she was trying to reach through it and pull me back. But I didn't give her the chance. I threw the car into drive and peeled away from the curb. My chest was pounding. My pulse drummed against the inside of my skull. I drove through streets I used to know by heart, but they didn't look the same anymore. It was like the whole world had shifted slightly out of place. I had no idea where I was going. I just knew I couldn't go back. I kept driving. No plan, no map, no destination in mind, just the road unfolding in front of me like some kind of escape route. The streetlights blurred into streaks, the city sliding past my window in a haze of neon and night. But none of it registered. My body was behind the wheel, but my head was still back there. Back in that booth. Back at that table. Watching her kiss him like I didn't exist. I should have left when she knocked on the window. Should have ignored her. But a part of me, God knows why, needed to hear her voice. Maybe I thought she'd say something to make it make sense. But she didn't. She only made it worse. "It's not what you think." That was her line. That pathetic line people use when they've run out of truth. What did she expect me to believe? That I imagined the way her hand grazed his wrist? That my brain just fabricated the way she leaned into him, like it was the most natural thing in the world? No. There was no way out of this with words. No fixing what I saw. A red light made me stop, and that's when the full weight of it hit me. I had nowhere to go. Home was off the table. The idea of stepping foot inside that house, our house, made me feel sick. Every room would be poisoned. Every memory would be stained. I couldn't do it. Not yet. I pulled into an empty parking lot and shut the engine off. The silence inside the car was deafening, but at least it matched the way I felt inside. I needed time to think. But thinking only made it worse. Every thought took me backward. To the late nights she claimed were work. To the mornings when she was already up and gone before I even opened my eyes. To the way she started dressing differently. Carrying herself like someone with a secret. I noticed it. I just didn't want to admit it. Had I been blind? Or just refusing to see? I leaned back in my seat, rubbed my hands down my face, and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. My body felt like it had aged 10 years in the span of a few hours. My muscles ached, not from anything physical, but from the emotional weight dragging me down. That's when my phone buzzed. I didn't even want to look. But I did. It was her. First one call. Then another. Then a third. I didn't answer. Finally, a message. "Jason, please come home. Let's talk." I stared at the words. My jaw clenched. Come home. Like we could just pick up where we left off. Like the past few hours hadn't burned a hole straight through everything we built. Another message came through. "I'm so sorry." Sorry. That word meant nothing now. It couldn't erase the image of her with him. Couldn't rebuild what she broke. It was empty. Weightless. I shut my phone off and tossed it onto the passenger seat. The lot was empty except for a few scattered streetlights flickering in the distance. The air outside was still and cold. It should have been calming. But all it did was echo the storm that was ripping through my chest. I thought about checking into a hotel. Somewhere to crash. But even that felt too final. Like I was making some kind of decision I wasn't ready to make yet. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove to the only place that had ever felt like home before her. It took me out past the edge of the city, to a neighborhood I hadn't seen in forever. My childhood home wasn't there anymore. My parents had moved years back, but the streets still looked the same. Like old ghosts I never quite said goodbye to. I parked near the park where I used to play ball during summer breaks. The swings creaked in the breeze, empty and forgotten. I got out of the car and walked toward the bench near the courts. My legs felt heavy, like every step was weighed down by what I'd just lived through. I sat down, let the cold sink into my bones. And for the first time that night, I let it all hit me. The betrayal. The heartbreak. The humiliation. This wasn't just about some kiss. It was about the years I'd spent loving someone who clearly hadn't felt the same. About the trust one gave freely while she lived a lie behind my back. The wind whipped through the trees, but I barely noticed. I had no answers. No plan. Just a hollow chest and the question that wouldn't stop spinning in my head. What the hell do I do now? Because no matter what came next, no matter how this played out, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I would never be the same again. And neither would she. I must have sat there on that bench for over an hour, just staring at the cracked pavement like it held the answer to everything. The longer I sat, the colder it got, but I didn't move. I didn't want to. That park, that spot, it was the last place on earth where I felt untouched by her betrayal. I was alone, but for once, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt honest. My phone hadn't buzzed in a while. Maybe Amanda had finally gotten the message. Or maybe she was still sitting at home, waiting, wondering, spinning whatever story she thought might soften the blow. That was the part that made my stomach turn the most. Not just that she had done it, but that she'd still tried to twist it into something less ugly. It's not what you think. That line had played on repeat in my head, and every time, it hit harder. What else could it have been? What version of reality did she think I might accept? Was she going to say it was an old friend? That she got carried away? That it was one stupid mistake? I already knew the script. I could picture every line she'd feed me. The apologies. The tears. The insistence that it didn't mean anything. And maybe, if I were weaker, I would have believed her. But I wasn't. I had given her everything. My loyalty, my love, my trust, and she threw it away like it was nothing. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't know what I was hoping to find. Maybe some final message. Some sign. But I didn't open her texts. I didn't need to. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I called Brandon. Brandon had been my best friend since college. We'd been through everything together. Bad breakups, job changes, late-night breakdowns. He'd been the best man at our wedding. He knew me better than anyone. The phone barely rang twice before he picked up. His voice was groggy, thick with sleep. "Jason." I hesitated. It was late. Way too late to be calling. But I didn't have anyone else I wanted to hear right then. "Yeah," I said. "Sorry, man. I shouldn't have called this late." He paused, the sleep falling away from his tone in an instant. "What's going on?" I stared at the concrete beneath my feet, trying to find the words. "I caught Amanda," I said quietly. "With someone else." Silence. Then a low curse under his breath. "Where are you?" "Old neighborhood. Park near my parents' old house." "I'm on my way," he said, already moving before I could stop him. "Bran," I tried, but he'd already hung up. Honestly, I was relieved. I'd spent so long feeling like I was losing my mind, like this couldn't be real. But the moment I told him, said it out loud to someone else, it was real. Solid. Undeniable. And when Brandon pulled into the lot 20 minutes later, headlights cutting through the dark like searchlights, it felt like I could finally take a breath. He climbed out of his truck, still in sweatpants and a hoodie, hair messy and face serious. He didn't say anything at first. Just sat down on the bench beside me, letting the quiet settle between us. "All right," he finally said. "Tell me everything." And I did. I told him about the whisper I ignored. The way I ended up at that bar. The look on her face when she saw me standing there. The wedding ring I left on the table. I told him about the messages. The half-assed explanations. How I couldn't even bring myself to look her in the eye without feeling sick. By the time I was done, my hands were clenched into fists in my lap, jaw tight, chest heavy. Brandon sat there, quiet for a long beat, just taking it all in. Then he let out a low sigh. "I always had a weird feeling about her," he said. I looked over at him. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, staring straight ahead. "Not that I knew she was cheating or anything. Just, she always had this way of making everything about her. Like she needed to be the star of every room. Even when you proposed, remember that?" She turned it into this whole performance. You were down on one knee, pouring your heart out, and she just kept talking about how shocked she was. How overwhelmed. You barely got a word in. I blinked. I hadn't thought about that in years. Back then, I'd chalked it up to nerves. Excitement. But now, it sounded different. Brandon shook his head. I'm not saying I saw this coming. Just that, maybe I should have said something sooner. You couldn't have changed anything, I said, voice low. I wouldn't have believed you anyway. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of it all just hanging there. Then he turned to me. So what now? That was the question, wasn't it? I could already picture Amanda sitting at home, probably rehearsing her apology like it was some kind of sales pitch. I could see her trying to cry just enough to make me doubt myself, trying to wrap this betrayal in soft edges. But now, with the cold night air in my lungs and Brandon sitting beside me, I finally knew the answer. I can't go back, I said. Brandon nodded. Then don't. And just like that, for the first time all night, something inside me settled. This wasn't about what she did anymore. It was about who I was, who we were, and who we clearly weren't. The next morning, I woke up in Brandon's spare room feeling like I'd barely slept. My body hurt in a way that had nothing to do with muscles or joints. It was deeper than that. Something buried under my ribs that wouldn't stop aching. I hadn't dreamed. Just floated somewhere in the gray space between exhausted and numb. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky in those soft, pale colors that normally feel peaceful. But nothing about me felt peaceful. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror for a long time, just staring at myself. I didn't look like me. My eyes were dull, my face pale, and the space on my finger where my ring used to be looked like a scar. I needed to go home. Not because I wanted to see her, not because I was ready for some heart-to-heart, but because everything I owned was still in that house. My clothes, my books, my life, and I needed to get it back. Brandon was still asleep when I slipped out. I didn't leave a note. I didn't need to. He knew where I was going. The drive back was quiet. No music. Just the steady hum of tires on asphalt and the occasional burst of wind against the windshield. And the closer I got to that house, the more my chest tightened. Her car was still in the driveway when I pulled up. Of course it was. I sat in the car for a minute, gripping the wheel like it was holding me together. Then I got out and walked up the front steps. Before I could even raise my hand to knock, the door opened. She'd been waiting. Amanda stood there wrapped in one of my old sweatshirts. Her face was puffy, hair pulled back messily. She looked like she hadn't slept either. "Jason," she whispered, like my name was a prayer she didn't know how to say anymore. I didn't answer. Just stepped inside. The house looked the same, smelled the same, but it felt foreign now, like walking into someone else's life. One I used to belong to but didn't anymore. "I didn't think you'd come back," she said softly. "I'm not staying," I replied, flat and cold. She nodded like she'd already guessed that, but she followed me anyway as I walked through the living room. Her presence behind me felt heavy, like a ghost I couldn't shake. "Please," she said, standing in the doorway as I grabbed a bag from the closet. "Can we talk?" I kept my back to her. "How long?" I asked. There was a pause. "A few months." I closed my eyes. It didn't surprise me. Not really. I think I already knew. "Why?" I asked. She let out a breath, shaky and unsure. "I don't know," she said. "It just happened." I let out a bitter laugh. "Right. Because cheating just happens. I wasn't trying to hurt you. But you did." She stepped forward. "I still love you, Jason." I turned to face her. And for the first time in days, I realized I didn't believe her. Or maybe I just didn't care anymore. "That doesn't matter," I said quietly. She reached for me, but I stepped back. Her hand hung in the air for a second before dropping back to her side. "I need time," I said. "And space." Her lips trembled. "Are you leaving?" "For now," I said. "I don't know what comes after that." Tears slid down her cheeks, but I didn't move to comfort her. She'd lost the right to that part of me. I finished packing a few essentials: clothes, my laptop, wallet. I didn't need much. I could come back for the rest later. She stood by the door the whole time, wringing her hands like she didn't know what to do with them. When I was done, I turned to her one last time. "I'll be back for the rest," I said. She nodded. And in her eyes, I saw the question she didn't ask out loud. Is this the end? I didn't have an answer. So I walked out. The moment I stepped outside, it felt like I could finally breathe again. The air was cold, sharp, and clean. Like I'd just come up from underwater. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I got in the car, started the engine, and pulled away from that house. Not just the physical place, but everything it had stood for. The love I thought we shared. The future I thought we were building. The version of her I thought I knew. All of it stayed behind that door. I drove until the city turned into nothing but small towns and long stretches of open road. The sky darkened, and for the first time in days, I didn't feel like I was running. I felt like I was heading toward something, even if I didn't know what it was yet. Eventually, I stopped at a little roadside diner. The kind of place that smells like coffee and pancakes and hasn't changed since the 80s. I slid into a booth by the window, ordered something I barely touched, and just sat there, letting the silence wash over me. Across the diner, a couple was laughing at something on a phone screen, heads pressed together. I had to look away. That used to be us. Or at least, I thought it was. After the diner, I couldn't bring myself to go back to Brandon's. I needed something else, space that was mine. Space that didn't come with memories or expectations or people waiting to see how I'd react. So I pulled into the first roadside motel I could find. Cheap. Quiet. Forgettable. The kind of place no one asks questions. The room smelled faintly like old carpet and bleach. The wallpaper was peeling in spots. But none of that mattered. For one night it was mine. I tossed my bag on the chair, sat on the edge of the bed, and just stared at the wall. It was different here. Still and quiet in a way my house never was. It didn't feel like waiting. It didn't feel like guilt. It just was. Eventually, I turned my phone back on. The screen lit up like a Christmas tree. Missed calls. Messages. Voicemails. All from Amanda. I didn't open a single one. Instead, I called Brandon. The second he picked up, his voice came through sharp and concerned. "Where are you?" "I'm okay," I said, though I didn't know if that was true. I just needed a little more space. He didn't push. He never does. Then he asked me the question I'd been trying to avoid all day. "You think you made the right call?" I stared at the ceiling for a while before answering. "There's no right call," I said. "Just the one I can live with." "Yeah," he said quietly. "And if you can't live with her anymore, then don't." His words settled into me like something I'd known deep down all along but hadn't been ready to admit. We hung up soon after. I didn't sleep much that night either, but something had shifted. The rawness, the panic, it had dulled just a little. Not gone, but quieter. The next morning I woke up in that motel bed with the sun pushing through the curtains and a strange sense of clarity I hadn't felt in days. This was my life now. Not the life I planned. Not the one Amanda and I spent years building. But it was mine. I showered, got dressed, grabbed a coffee at the gas station across the street. And for once, I didn't feel like I was running. I was just going. Amanda had left one last message overnight. A simple text. "I won't bother you anymore. I just want you to know I regret everything. I'm sorry for hurting you. You deserved better." I stared at it for a while, waiting to feel something. Anger. Sadness. Pity. But all I felt was peace. I typed back a single reply. "I did deserve better. And I'm going to find it." Then I powered off the phone and put it away. Over the next few days, I kept to myself. I didn't rush back into anything. I didn't drown myself in distractions. I just let myself exist again. Quiet walks. Books I'd been meaning to read for years. Long drives to nowhere in particular. And slowly, something started to shift. Each day, it hurt a little less. Each morning, I woke up with a little more air in my lungs. And one day, I didn't even notice it at first, I got through the whole day without thinking about Amanda at all. That was the moment I knew I'd made it through the worst of it. She was a chapter. A painful one, sure. One that shook me to my core and forced me to confront everything I didn't want to believe. But she wasn't the whole story. Not anymore. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I was finally ready to write the next part. Thank you for visited my YouTube channel. Your support, likes, and comments truly inspire me to create even more engaging content. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. You're a part of this amazing community, and I'm thrilled to share my stories with you. See you in the next video on YouTube.